Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us. And welcome everybody once again to a Thursday teissTalk, our first one of July, one of three actually. We've got a great show for you. Obviously, we're going to be talking about building resilient InfoSec teams. Before that, we have a couple of notices, as we normally do. First off, welcome to our viewers from LinkedIn. If you're watching us on LinkedIn Live, you will not be able to ask any questions. Unfortunately, you will need to flick over to teiss.co.uk, find the teissTalk site and log in from there. However, you're still welcome where you are from LinkedIn. And talking of asking questions, the very best question that is asked in the chat, which I think is roughly around about here on your screens. You can ask a question in the chat, and if it's one that makes us laugh, makes us cry, makes us squirm awkwardly, or just is one I randomly choose at the end, you could be in the winning for a teissTalk mug, the very collectible teissTalk mugs. So do ask questions, do keep us on our toes. And talking of questions and toes, let me now bring onto the stage our three wonderful panelists. Welcome Raza, Sarah and Christoph. Hello, Raza.
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Very good. It's good to have you back. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, how's it going?
Very good. It's good to have you on a virtual session rather than in person this time. And Christoph, welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
Well, inviting you. I should also say that Christoph is a sponsor, so we actually had no choice about inviting you. So thank you, Christoph, and the lovely folks at Zscaler for sponsoring this week. That we will all thank you for the free tea, coffee, and biscuits that you've provided for us today. So, without further ado, shall we jump into the news item? It's from friends of the show, Bleeping Computer. Yes, this isn't just any breach. This is an M&S breach. And they finally confirmed that formally that it was all the result of social engineering that led to, frankly, a huge and very almost paralyzing ransomware attack against Marks and Spencer's. And it just goes to show, doesn't it, that, computers are hard to hack, but people actually are quite easy.
And just to mention, it's not just Marks and Spencer's. We've seen this kind of attacks all across the industry, especially the European retail industry. Many others were hit in the recent couple of weeks. I wouldn't say all of them were the victim of social attacks, but I would bet the majority was.
Yes. Yeah.
So coming back to this, I think the social engineering has been on our minds for ages, right? We're doing awareness campaigns in our companies. We're training everybody to be ready for these kinds of attacks, to not hand out your passwords, not reuse them, that kind of stuff. But I think there is something that what at least my personal experience was also that people are being overwhelmed with this amount of measures and things they need to do and are not allowed to do. And we're here IT people, we're managers mostly. So I think we're well equipped with this knowledge for years, but somebody where IT isn't the primary focus of his life, for them, it's probably quite overwhelming. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. Go on. Sorry.
Go ahead, Raza. Sorry.
I was just going to say it's behaviors more than anything else. From what the article talked about, there was a consultancy service also involved potentially, and there was a compromise there. So we're not talking about people within the firm, but it's also from people from outside the firm who are we've outsourced services to. So it's really important to look at both the supplier risk element, but also the internal risk. But all of this boils down to people and behaviors and how we're managing those, or how we understanding those behaviors and what the compromises could be and the key risks and the vulnerabilities. And I think that's really what I could see from this article. It really screams out.
I agree with that. I think we have a running joke within the marketing sort of circles of in cybersecurity, and it's that cyber criminals and especially social engineers are better marketers than marketers are. They just know all of the tricks. They really do
Absolutely.
know how to. It's not just about how they deliver on the campaigns they put together, but they know how to build communication that really
Yeah.
engages with the user, right? So they build storytelling into their comms. They know how to really get you with, a bit of that curiosity gap where they pull
Mm.
you in just enough to say, okay, here, click this button and you'll whatever it is. But like you said, it comes down to the human at the end of the day, the people, and that's what they rely on. They rely on the fact that they know people and know them from a psychological perspective as well, and understand behaviors to a point where they really get the best of the engagement that marketers dream of.
And a colleague of mine once said, modern hackers don't hack in, they log in. And I think that's pretty true. And if you think about the other side, outside the regular IT world, like these grandmother calls, it's all following the same scheme, right? It's putting people under pressure or giving them things they're looking forward to, motivate them emotionally, and then getting them to do things they wouldn't do normally. They learned a couple of times, don't click that link. But if that email is so convincing and so tempting, then you click first and think later. And I think this is what we can indeed learn from the attacker's perspective, right?
I'm fortunate enough to get some access to some very good research based on actual incidents and breaches, etc. And I can't remember the exact stats, so I'm happy to be corrected here, but it's something like of the stuff that we saw, 70% of attacks were purely from logging in with known credentials that started. And that's really quite scary when someone has literally either just willingly handed a credential over, or the credential was so easily attacked or not a defensible password or whatever, that people were able to just log straight in. I think that's a table stake. That's such a fundamental thing.
It's not even
that's one.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was going to say that's sort of one side of the piece of the puzzle, let's say, right? Because there's the breach side of it, and I think that needs to be addressed. And communications and engagement is something that can sort of play in really well, especially with security awareness. But then the other side is creating that sort of psychological safety for people to then feel like they can go to their teams or superiors or whoever it might be to then discuss what's happened, and to bring it, sort of open it up into the company, the forum, the team, whatever it might be, so that it doesn't just feel like a mistake that needs to be brushed under the rug.
Absolutely. And that if you have that level of confidence to approach your line manager or your supervisor or whatever, that level of comfort has to be created within the firm or any team, so that they're able to really discuss it. So when you are faced with a bad element who is forcing you to do something or giving you something, you recognize that you're not used to being talked to that way, or challenged or harassed in that way, and therefore your reflexes and your behaviors will automatically default to, let me question this. Why am I being asked for this information? Or how do they have this information? Anyway, sorry.
And when you mentioned people log in straight, I think we did a lot on the technological side of things to prevent that from being straight, right? We put second factors, we put, I don't know, YubiKeys, a lot of technical measures that will help people to not accidentally hand out their password. But I think we still recognize the limits of this approach, right? Because despite all of this in place, we still see either second factor is not working. It's very hard to cover complex companies with that. So it all comes down to the individual in the end, and having these practices. And I think what you shared, Sarah, that rang a lot of bells for me, this sharing the failures. I've had this in my circle of friends. Somebody clicked the link and then was really ashamed about, I just completed the awareness training in my company, and now I did this. I can't even admit it to the mirror. And I think this shame is exactly what needs to go away, because the methods are getting better, because we see it's still happening despite all the training efforts that we do. And I think this is exactly how we can better learn from each other. This, like I told this friend, share it with the others. Tell them why you clicked the link and why you were so curious about it. So he may not in the future. And the same is true for the corporate environment, for sure. Nothing is more powerful than a C-level, maybe a CEO sharing in a company call. Even I clicked a link, and that's why. And that's why you should be even more careful than me.
Yeah, I think coming from the top down really makes a difference, because you can't rely on, a junior analyst to feel comfortable enough to say, I've made this massive mistake, when in actuality, maybe they just haven't had enough experience with the security awareness training. But I mean, that being said, there's, the way that you communicate those messages as well as a company feeds into the culture, right? And that helps build either a very strong security culture and security awareness culture within the company or not. I mean, it does come down to, who's saying what and how it's being said.
Yeah. And I think that's a really nice segue into the panel proper. This is one of the ways that you build resilient teams, right? This is just one of the key things of building a culture and building an environment in which people feel they can be, or are expected to be, open and honest about mistakes, because that's how the entire company learns and grows.
And to maybe feed a bit more flesh to the bones, Zscaler recently conducted a survey in many parts of the world about personal resilience in special, but also resilience in general. And we derived this resilience by design pattern from it, which is both technology and personal resilience, of course. But it says that 63%, so almost 2/3 of the participants, stated that they are not satisfied with their personal resilience. I mean, this could have many aspects in life, of course, but it shows that people are even aware of this. It's not that we have to uncover that first. So we're addressing an open gate, right? And how to support everyone in becoming more resilient. And I think, as we do it in other areas of life, let's help the companies, let's help our friends and neighbors in becoming more resilient. And I think nothing works better than having been through this once or twice yourself. But the next best experience is having a certain level of practice with it, talk about it, reflect on it. And I think this is what both of you, Raza and Sarah, you already said, this reflection is what makes the difference, right?
Absolutely. And I really liked both your points when you say that with regards to speaking about it, and also referring back to Sarah's point about tone at the top. It's also listening the tone from the bottom. It are people in the top listening to what's going on the bottom, and that's equally, if not more important sometimes. Absolutely right, the leadership, and we have that, but I also see that what I've found very interesting within this firm is that we listen to what's going on the ground and react to that appropriately and proportionately, and I think that's really key as well. So, because that's where a lot of the errors are identified or challenges are identified, and we fix them. So we need to think about how we communicate that and how we workshop that and how we bring that to life and make that much more, this is what happened, this is what we did, and could we have done it better? Sure. Can we do it better now? Can we implement some of those things? So those action points and those follow-up, I think follow-up is key. And as risk, we need to facilitate a lot of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
is this how we measure it? Is this how we measure up people's or our team's ability to cope with cyber incidents or failure scenarios?
Well,
exactly.
Let me maybe make one point first, and I think that's also crucial. I see currently that many company leaders are even questioning, do we need to invest more in personal resilience? So we've done awareness campaigns for years. The click rate's going down from, I don't know, 20% to 15.1, and it staggers there. Do we still need millions to do this? But I think it's so important for us as leaders to step up and say, personal resilience is completely tied to business resilience, right? I'm not sure about this example that we had with Marks and Spencer's, but in the end, we see how much impact it has if people are under stress, not well trained, not aware, not being able to judge on the impact of their decisions. So we can't underestimate this effort. And just to complete this, I think many companies we've seen, they've invested a lot in technology, as I said, zero trust platforms, redundancy. They put a lot of money into disaster recovery as well, which is all good and fine. But again, the missing link in all of this, making a company really resilient, is exactly that point that you just pointed out, Tom. Getting the people there and consistently, and this is not a one-time thing. You're not investing for a one-time training campaign or something, but it's an ongoing thing forever.
I think you said something interesting there, because I think beyond going even one step further, maybe it's meeting people where they are and giving them the content and communications that they enjoy. Because a lot of the time you'll do sort of these tick box exercises for security awareness, where you think, I'm going to do something every 6 months. Okay, done, it's finalized and whatever. And maybe you get an email, phishing campaign every couple of months, and okay, that's great. That's not how we consume anymore. So we're looking at things like TikTok, we're on Instagram, we are on LinkedIn, we're not consuming content in the same way that we did 10 years ago. And yet all of the, not all, but a majority of the security awareness training looks like it has come from 10 years ago and potentially did. So, there's talking about the culture aspect, and that's important, I think, but also taking into consideration the way people have evolved and the way we consume content and media has drastically changed, and therefore so should the training that we engage with.
Yeah. And relying on an e-learning suite doesn't fit, in my opinion, today's world. We need to be continuously engaging with teams, engaging with our members, and say, so what are the challenges are you facing? Because we need to understand the challenges they're facing, as opposed to just telling them what the regulation looks like. They know what bad happens, but what are the challenges they're facing, so how their behaviors, and we need to understand what their behaviors are, so that we can actually celebrate those behaviors. And I think that's really important to actually, I'm not saying necessarily gamify it, but do have an engagement piece where you're discussing these options, that this could happen. What are you going to do to solve it? And then what would the outcome look like? And what has the outcome actually looked like with the real incidents that you've gone through? So anyways.
But you mentioned yesterday, Raza, in our prep call, about having regular workshops with your dev teams, your tech teams, your whatever. And this isn't just about how can we do better at XYZ. It's about what about this is difficult for you, and why?
Exactly. Why? Exactly. It's so important. And listening to them, as opposed to you telling them. So telling is not the problem. The issue here is we're not listening to people, and we should be listening to the challenges they're facing and come up with resolutions. And that's where, going back to Christoph's point, that's where you build the resilience, don't you? Because you empower people to think for themselves, to become resilient and question it themselves, and find the solutions also within themselves.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a question.
Just one little thing. We touched a lot now on this phishing stuff as an example, but in the end, and I don't want to blame the industry, I've seen some pretty good gamified solutions for that as well. But I think this is just one little aspect of personal resilience. I think the other thing that you now focus on, rather, is like, what happens if you're hit by, let's say, a cyber attack? That means it typically happens on a Friday evening or a Saturday morning, right? When you are at home. You get that call, you call to the office, and you immediately think, oh, Jesus Christ, I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks, day and night in the office fighting back. I think this type of resilience, how do we organize our teams in such a situation? How do we also take care of them? Should they really work 24/7 to recover? Or is it maybe better to have a streamlined plan, have defined roles, have people go home and sleep and do their work, and then you do what's needful on that Saturday, and then you continue on Monday? There are many options out there, and I think nothing's better than the real simulations in this. Getting ready with crisis simulation. I've done a couple, and I really love those, to be honest. And every time you think you've done it super well, like 100 other things pop up that you never thought about every year, again and again. and every time you get more resilient. I think that point that I wanted to make, that's an interesting thing that my colleague Kate has put out there. It's a questionnaire that we can probably also share with the participants later, a self-assessment for everyone to see what resilience persona they actually are. Interesting for me. So I was more the spontaneous management type who's like running around and trying to save things. But there are others, more thorough thinkers who can better prepare things. So it's important to understand in every team that can be affected how this will match in the situation of crisis. And I'm not only talking cyber incidents. This could also be any kind of incidents, a fire in the building, someone's hit by a bus, whatever. What to do in such a situation? How do we organize people? Have you made experiences in this dimension already?
So useful for you to have for your own life outside of work, because you need to understand how to be resilient beyond just the 9 to 5 as well. And so that gets brought into the workplace, and everything you learn in the workplace it shouldn't feel like there's this massive gap between the two, because when you build resilience, it should feel holistic, I feel.
Correct.
Yeah.
Seamless.
Seamless.
You should just go from one to the other, and that, I think the communication devices that we've got today, and recognizing, that it's not gonna happen all the time. It's gonna be only, and then understanding how do you classify something that is significant or not significant. And I think that's also very important. And because sometimes we may not know if it's a significant event until much later. So you need to then also manage that process, whereby you're not telling the whole world, but you're engaging the right people immediately. You take action, and then as the situation develops, then you involve the right stakeholders.
Yeah.
So I think that's also important. I know I've seen it in bigger organizations, and I've worked in some of the larger ones, and now I'm in a much more agile and much more efficiently run organization today. And I can see the difference. I can see how the larger organizations face those challenges with there's so many stakeholders to satisfy that it gets completely, it becomes ineffective. You'd be creating an operational risk basically within those organizations. Whereas I see here, it's so much more effective and much more efficient because we're actually talking to the right people immediately. And I think that's important. Even if you're in a larger organization, if I was to go back, I would say, you need to create those channels really effectively. And I think that is something that most organizations should be working with.
I think also a lot. Oh, sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, aligning it with the business narrative as well, right? So not making security feel like an afterthought or something that you have to go around, really just embedding it into the culture so that it feels like it's seamless across every department. So it's not something where you say, oh, God, how do I get around this MFA? How do I, it's something that everybody takes a little bit of pride in because it's been done from both the top down and bottom up.
We started with security by design. Now we're getting into resilience by design. And I think Alan in the chat raised a very interesting point about people working remotely. I think this is a real driver to how we do things today. I think in this study that we published, there was the term emotional responder. Who can we talk to in the situation of crisis? And everybody needs to have a different persona to resolve to. So there might be the people who need their boss to like, this is what happened, what should I do now? And then there are others who are like, I know exactly what to do, and you need maybe someone to calm them down a little bit. And I think this is a lot easier when everybody was sitting in the office. But as we just heard, these attacks are occurring on a Friday evening or over Christmas. We had a lovely example last year. And how to deal in a situation where everybody's across the world, maybe even on their vacation or honeymoon or something, how to get people together and help them find their responders on time. Quite interesting one. Yeah. Sorry, Tom, maybe I stole your question now.
No, not at all. Not at all. Absolutely. It's one less for me to ask. And in fact, Christoph, you mentioned that questionnaire. If you're able to, if you are able to put the URL for it into the chat, then please feel free to. But the first question that Alan asked, which I think is a very good one, and it's an interesting stance on here, is it worth reminding employees of their duty of care towards their employees, productivity gain and losses from unwell or well staff, and then flagging the always on stress that their cybersecOps, CIR, and other teams are exposed to. And I think that's often overlooked,
very important,
because we
so
just do it. We just get on with it.
Yeah. Or it's expected.
Yeah.
But we need to recognize that they're also stressed and they're also going through an emotional, challenging situation. So we need to be very mindful of the way we communicate. And I think asking questions of them, okay, so where we're at with everything, is not necessarily the most appropriate way of asking something. And we need to be mindful of the timing. And then there's a tendency of a lot of, like I said, too many cooks saying, oh, but where are we with this and that? No, I think we need to be very mindful when you're dealing with an incident or you have an incident manager, you leave it to that incident manager to challenge and give an update, but also say, okay, this is where I need help. So I agree with that question that Alan's asked in terms of looking at the duty of care from our side, from outsiders to insiders, but also the insiders have to demonstrate that this is a challenge, this is where we're going with it, and this is the pressure points. So it's a bit of communication both sides. Comms is really important in such a
having
situation.
an environment where they can ask those questions or can make those statements as well.
Yes,
Especially,
and if they have commitments, sorry, Christoph, if they have commitments, if they've got to go somewhere, so you ask them to tell you, are you okay to do this? Do you need backup? Can you arrange a backup? So you do need to also ask the question to say, did you have any prior commitments? Because I understand it's a Saturday night or it's a Friday evening and we're just about to go off. So what is your backup in case you need to do some things? So I think that question needs to be asked.
It's more generic than just for the crisis situation, right? You might have escalation as well. But I think also important is the entire topic of leadership in general in this situation, right? We would expect from leaders, top level to mid-tier leaders and leaders to the employees as well, that they always have that open ear. But open ear takes time, right? This is a thing that needs to be recognized. And I think we all as leaders know how stressful days can be and that you cut on this little one-on-one. But even more important than in everyday life, I think it's at the crisis situation. So in these examples where I've been through some luckily smaller cyber attacks, and you spend like 6 hours in a row trying to fix things, to stop the attacker, to identify things, to give hourly reports to the board level and telling them where we are. I think particularly there, just to share a few examples, it's not only that you try to link as a leader with your team really frequently, like, guys, let's get on a call for 5 minutes and see, are you okay? Does somebody need to drop out and get some fresh air? We also had this thing that we said we have a call open day and night where anybody can just jump on and vent. Like, I'm going nuts. I don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah,
it's not just a leader downwards thing. It's also a people
bottom up. Yeah, absolutely.
Help each other out. One might be the calm person. We talked about these personas earlier for resilience. One stays always calm, but is maybe a bit too lazy with things. Others are rushing forward and then maybe need a bit calming down. So I think usually the teams we build, they bring a lot of those persona types. And I think especially in times of crisis, this will pay out. Don't you think?
Absolutely. And in fact, Alan has made an early bid for the mug in sheer volume of statements on the chat, if nothing else, if not quality. I'm just saying, Alan. But he's also put in a link there. It's from who is it?
Careers Info Security.
But it's mentioning mental health in cybersecurity, MHINCS, the foundation that's been set up. I've got some connection with them, but they've done some research that found a very clear link between cyber resilience and good mental health. So worth a read anyway. It's adjacent to what we're talking about. One other thing I just want to raise here from Gary Osborne: resilience isn't something you do; it's something you are. Our challenge as leaders is how do we instill and empower our teams to do just enough. Just enough is an interesting choice of words there, but yeah, how do we do that? My initial thought is culture, right? But how do we even start that?
I mean, it's building those building blocks for communication, open communication. I take the security out of it. How do you want to build just a really good culture for your company, right? You rely on the people who understand culture, who know what's important, right? But then it's a lot of it is the communications. Going back to the topic we were just on, and when the shit hits the fan, let's say,
Yeah.
a lot of the time the rest of the company is just kind of in the dark, right?
Yeah.
They don't get reasonable
You're
updates. They don't
absolutely
know
right.
what's happening. Every other department is just, on as normal, and
Yeah.
we're just functioning, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But when you don't have those open lines of communications, and when you're not letting the rest of the company know, hey, this team is really in the trenches right now, our front line is in the trenches and trying to get things worked on and trying to get them done, that goes a long way. That openness, that community or sense of
Yeah.
community, let's say, needs to be built before you can have a really strong security culture. There's culture, and then
Absolutely.
security sits on top of that.
So well said. And I think that the fact of just enough, going back to the point that was raised, I think that just enough is also important to recognize that, yes, we'd like to do everything to make it really secure, but right now the expectation of the day is to get this thing done. So let's get this thing done. But then going back to the point that I made earlier, you need to have the follow-up. And then when you do the full, it's not just the band-aid, you're going for the
Yep.
full fix. So going back to Sarah's point was exactly, you create the community. Okay, let's just fix this right now. Understand that it's not absolutely perfect, but it is good enough to get this working, functioning, get everything right, and have the backups ready. But then next time we do the follow-up. And I think that's where I'm really, really keen on that. Anyways, over to you, Christoph.
No, I just wanted to mention, I was not involved in these cyber resilience plans. What happens if? And I think that the stuff we all know is like public communication that you have to share. We've been hit by a cyber attack. There's a press article ready. There are people ready to start communicating, stay ahead of the wave. But of course, you need to also do this internally, like your intranet, your teams, and this can all be prepared, right? It's not that you have to develop communication all time anew. It's like everybody stay calm. This is what happened. It might not even work in the classical way. Maybe your intranet has been affected and you can't push something. Then be ready to send an email or be sending text messages or something to tell everybody, be calm, this is under control. If you have any urgent questions or feedback, this is where you can address it. This can all be prepared. And I think this is why it's so important to have this resilience by design mindset early up in the stages, because it doesn't have to be in a cyber incident when you learn. A lot of this can be done up front, and there have been so many companies like Marks and Spencer's who've been affected. Why not reaching out to someone saying, can you share a bit your experience? What worked, what didn't work, and what can we do better in our preparation?
Yeah.
Especially
there's a good question here from Ashley Lardner as well. Isn't resilience more something that you develop over time, either consciously through learning or forced to through dealing with incident handling? This is analogous to first responders. There's a strong movement in EMS about mental health and resilience. And I think this touches on the last point that we're covering in the last few minutes is, how do we build a resilient mindset, or even a cyber resilient mindset, if we want to be really on point, amongst our team? How do we teach this rather than either hope that we've got people who it comes naturally to, or we have to put people through the absolute ringer for them to get it?
I think you meet people where they are. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
You need to meet people. I personally think forcing people to log into a system and watch a 4-hour video, or a 1-hour video in 4 sessions it doesn't match with how we consume today. And so meeting people where they are, talking about things they care about. I know one really, really great security awareness trainer who comes in and through he just does a standard workshop, but throughout the session he talks about things that parents will care about, because he knows 80% of the people in the room are parents. So he'll bring up, how do I keep my child safe when they're online? And he has those discussions as part of the wider security discussion. So if they're not paying attention and something comes up about protecting your children online, he sees them perk up, and then he's got their attention.
Yeah.
And so it's all about that engagement using psychology. I've always thought, like I said before, cyber criminals are great marketers, really, but it is about the engagement aspect, making sure people are interested and staying interested, and not just giving them policies won't protect. That I think it's nice to have, but it's just not going to happen realistically. So meeting them where they are, I think, is really important.
Yeah. There's the saying, right? The Titanic was the most compliant ship of its time, right?
Yeah.
Right.
The thing that you just pointed out, this is, I think, for the wider audience, Sarah, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would still say for the small amount of people really always impacted with this kind of incident, and I'm not talking about the security world again, I think crisis simulation is the best you can do. The board level, SOC analysts, the people involved in such an immediate communication. We talk about maybe 20 to 100 people in a company, right? So this is an affordable thing. It's not a big deal. You test things. You might even set up a real scenario with external parties who play the attackers, and there's threatening music and stuff like that. It can actually be fun. But if you've been through this once, okay, this is what happens. I've done this before. It helps you to keep calm, to keep focused. And then for all the other people in large companies, as you said, Sarah, you probably can't afford these kind of simulations, right? So you need, as you said, address them where they are, and maybe find analogies that help them, and have this communication readily prepared. This is what I would recommend.
Mm-hmm. But I think you can also over-prepare, and I think that's also important, not to over-prepare. I think you need to let them say their bit. Just hear them out. And now going back to the point of listening, because you'll be surprised to learn so many things that are actually not being listened to. And when you have these workshops, a lot of things come to light. So I'm a big believer of that, because if you keep, and going back to Sarah's point, that you do meet them where they are, but you also make things relevant, relatable.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to relate to the team what they're going through. So for that to happen, you need to react as opposed to proact. Do you know what I mean? I think that's really important to listen and say, okay, this is what you're going through. Okay, so what does that mean? But hopefully, as a facilitator or as a risk person, I would have enough experience between me and the head of technology operations to figure out, okay, so what have we faced? What sort of scenarios have we seen in the past, so we can relate back to what they're going through? And usually we have seen some of this in the past, because human beings, though we've evolved and technology has come into place, a lot of it is the same, because we're all humans at the end of the day. So I don't know. I'm just being a bit. So going back to the question being raised by Kelly, saying, toxic environments and so forth. I don't know. I mean, toxic environments,
good for anything.
You shouldn't have toxic environments.
Well, I was just about to say that actually this is kind of like the baseline is.
Well, exactly, said, right?
Has there been any studies about toxic work environments and the impact on cyber resilience? Paraphrasing now, can't imagine a good organization having a bad response team, because the good organization will look after its
always
people.
Absolutely.
Bad organization won't. And I think, doesn't that actually underpin this whole resilience topic of be a good company? It doesn't take much or cost much. Look after people, look out for their health and well-being, look out for their growth, look out for the quality of work that they're doing, etc. And when the shit hits the fan, they're much more likely to step up and feel that they can be more resilient and act in a more resilient manner, because they've got fuel in the tank to do so.
Absolutely. And if they've been looked after, you feel for the organization, you feel for the company. You see, I'm going to get this right. I do not want to let this company down, or I don't want to let this thing down. So Absolutely agree
You
with
break
that. There's
that cycle of fear, I think, as well. There's
Yeah.
that fear of getting it wrong, that fear of clicking the link, that fear of then having to report it, that fear of being fired because of it. If you're in a really good and strong environment and your company culture is really strong, you don't have that fear. Inherently, you don't have that fear at work. So therefore, you might be more willing to say to your team lead, hey, I did this. I'm not sure what it means, but let's explore it together rather
absolutely.
than, try to hide it, try not to talk about it, hope everything goes okay. Because I think that's a big thing too. You could have criminals sitting on your system for months,
Yeah, for months you
years,
won't even
whatever it
know.
might be, and you wouldn't
Yeah,
know.
you wouldn't
But
know.
if you do build that type of culture, you're saving yourself the trouble down the line of, everything that might come, the fallout that might come after that. So there's something to be said, and I'm sure there are some analysis around this, or there's some, but there's something to be said about, like you said, building that strong culture as the
Yeah.
culture, and then making sure security sits on top of that.
Agreed.
That's right.
However, there's always culture and there's individuals. So let's not delink that. But I think towards Kelly and the question, I'm not sure if there's an exact study on toxicity and resilience, but I think the study that I referred to earlier, I just learned from my colleague that it will be released, I think, next week or so. So Tom, if you find, we can share both the study and also the resilience superpower quiz with the audience afterwards.
Yeah.
I think that gives a little indication in why management should pay attention to it, and also give a bit of an outlook how many of them have already realized that they need to do something, and how many think they're good enough. And I can already spoil it's not many.
Absolutely.
But I think that you're right, Christoph, but I think there are also studies on maturity of organizations. So the maturity aspect, it may not cover it from a bad toxic culture point of view, but you would find studies out, and I know I've read them all, quite a few of them, part of my certification, is that when you see mature organizations behaving immaturely, this is what we're talking about. They may not call it toxicity or toxic environments, but they will call it immature teams within very mature organizations. And that's what we see as subcultures developing. And then we need to focus on that and figure out what are the subcultures of that organization. So what's happening in, the different where the vulnerabilities are. And I think that needs to be really well managed. And
one thing is
absolutely
realize that there is a gap, and then ultimately to change it, which is some of the examples that we shared today.
Yeah.
On that point, I'm going to draw us to a close. I told you you'd all get your second wins minutes before we have to finish.
Could have kept going.
I know, right? I'm going to give each of you 10 seconds just to answer the question. What should our audience do when they get to their desks tomorrow morning on the topic of resilience in their security teams? Raza, let me start with you.
I'll ask, I'd expect you guys to go back to your wristband and say, when is the next workshop happening?
Okay, nice. Sarah?
Yeah, I would say something similar, except I would try to look at how do you actually engage with content in general, and then how can you bring that into the fold, especially if you are the security awareness person within your team or within your company. How can you make a change to sort of match what we're seeing in today's world rather than 10 years ago?
Yeah, very good. And finally, Christoph.
So if you get back to your desk tomorrow, ask yourself, if something bad would happen, would you know what to do? Whom to contact, whom to call, whom to send notifications? I'm sure it's all out there, but it's likely not very well communicated. So ask for it, bring it up, and tell, what would you do in my shoes?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I'm going to award 2 mugs today, I think. And for my Tice handlers off stage, I can knock it off the invoice if you want. I don't mind. But 2 mugs today, mostly are by volume. So Alan and Ashley will both get a mug sent to them in the post. Well done, both of you. Thank you all for your questions. Apologies, Ashley, you couldn't get to your last one. So congratulations. You can add them to your no doubt growing collections. Secondly, we've got another teissTalk next week on the 17th of July, refining your API security strategy to protect against AI-driven attacks. So join us again next week at 1600 hours, 4 p.m. UK time. In the meantime, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our audience. And thank you, Raza.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to our sponsor, Christoph.
Happy to sponsor.
And to our audience, stay secure, my friends.
Wow.